This one started slow, but when I got into the newspapers, I was overwhelmed with articles, and eventually I just had to stop clipping articles. I expected the articles to stop around the 30s or 40s, but when it kept going into the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, I was blown away. One surprise I'm going to spoil right now is that this company is still in business. I think that was the biggest surprise for me. So let's just start at the beginning, shall we? I was going to start with Albert Hewsing, the one who started this company, but it looks like we need to start with his dad, John August Hewsing. August was born in Germany and he came over as a child with his parents. Like a lot of people back then, he wore a lot of hats. In this 1870 census, we see that he's a liquor merchant, which he had from 1867 till 1873. And at that point, he was elected sheriff for 2 years. In the 1880 census, he's a saloon keeper, and he's also running a grocery store. He was also postmaster for the town for many years. Then he was a teller at People's National Bank until he got sick. Here in 1880, notice that he's got 3 daughters and 1 son, and that's our Albert that we're going to be talking about today. Now, Albert was born in 1860, and he started working with his dad when he graduated school when he was 17. He was a bookkeeper there. Then he was a messenger for the People's National Bank for a couple years, and then he was promoted to bank teller. He apparently was very good at accounting. After a few years, he moved into the insurance business. At this point, he's about 27 years old. Now, a couple years later, he became the city council as alderman of the 4th Ward. A few years after that, he ran for city clerk, which he served 3 terms. There are many articles in the paper of different issues that Hewsing was involved in. He was praised in his pristine accounting records. Hewsing is in the paper a lot during this time as city clerk. In 1891, John August, the dad, recently went to Chicago to have an eye operation, and he was given some belladonna to apply externally, as well as some internal medicine. He was staying at a hotel there. When he started feeling pain, he grabbed a bottle of medicine and mistakenly took a dose of the belladonna and poisoned himself. It's kind of laughable, though, that the doctor gave him a bottle of poison and a bottle of pain medicine to a half-blind man. Anyways, he crawled out of his room and he told the front desk that he accidentally poisoned himself. A doctor was called, and then they took him back to his room where he fell unconscious for several hours. He came to, and he went home about a week later. Now here's an 1895 article mentioning that Albert was rerunning for city clerk. It's quite a long write-up. It's complete with a photo of him. Then in 1898, he's running for sheriff. A very nice write-up for him here, but in the following week, someone was not as fond of him and accused Hewsing of being a typical politician and pandering to get votes for him and his buddies. Now this writer continues to slam Hewsing, and honestly it sounded very similar to what we would hear politically today. Some things never change. No Republican candidate has found it necessary to threaten women with discharge from small jobs because their husbands voted for another candidate. It was reserved for the gentlemanly Mr. Hewsing to descend to that kind of work, and he would give a pocket full of dollars if he hadn't done it. Then there's an 1899 article praising him again on his super efficient bookkeeping and a plea for him to stay in his position. Well, he wasn't elected sheriff, and his term for city clerk also ended in 1899. This is when he started bottling. But this same year, his dad died. This is 8 years after his poisoning. This article says that he's been having general debility for the past 8 years. One article even called him an invalid. So it seems that he had some lasting effects of that poisoning. It says that he had been confined to his home most of that time. It was the 4th of July. He was eating dinner at the window. He was watching some neighborhood kids with some firecrackers, and he mentioned that he knew one of the boys. Then he leaned back in his chair and he died. So we see in 1900, this is a year after he opened, that Albert is a pop manufacturer. I didn't know they called it pop back then. This 1901 article is interesting. Remember in previous videos how bottling companies would own the bottles that the beverages were put in, and you would bring the bottles back when you were done with it. This article says, as an act to prevent and punish unlawful buying and selling or using bottles or boxes belonging to the Hewsing Company, and it continues to describe the bottles. It says, the name A.D. Hewsing, with the words Rock Island, Illinois beneath the name, forming a circle, also the letters A.D.H. arranged in the form of a monogram in the center and at the bottom of the bottles. So he's describing my bottle. Here's a 1901 beer ad. In 1902, the company started distributing for Anheuser-Busch Brewing Association. They were the only distributors in the area. So here's 1910. Albert is married to Charlotte. Aren't they a cute little couple? And they have 3 kids named Albert Jr., Arthur, and Charlotte. Here's their home. It's a historical building now, and whoever cares for it seems to be taking very good care of it. They decorate for the holidays, and there's a Facebook page. Anyways, back to the 1910 census. His son Albert Jr. is 21, and here he's following his dad's footsteps and he's bookkeeping at the soda factory. The next year, in 1911, Albert went duck hunting with 2 friends, and they were waiting in the bushes, and when some ducks went by, they scrambled and one of their guns went off and shot Albert through the foot. Why does this remind me of like the Three Stooges? Anyway, Albert Jr. and Etta got married in 1912. And this says that he's head of the sales department at Huesing Bottling Works at this point. And here are the only pictures that I found of them. He's old in his picture and she's young in her picture. So Albert Sr. built a new manufacturing building in 1912 on the corner of 14th Street and 1st Avenue. And when I looked it up, this is what comes up, and it's still labeled as A.D. Hewsing. In 1914, he started Rock Island Artificial Ice Company, and he installed the machinery in his existing soda factory. 1920, father and son are still working together. This 1921 article talks about a rumor that ice prices were going to increase, but what I thought was interesting about this article was that it said the ice is being sold for $7 for 1,000 pounds. That same year, in 1921, the ice plant needs to be expanded, so he bought an adjoining property to his existing plant and he added on. 2 years later, he bought another adjacent piece of property and then he added on some more, complete with new machinery including refrigeration and ice hoists. In 1921, Albert Jr. and his wife Etta had a baby boy, but he died about 2 weeks later, and they did not have another child. Now, skipping ahead to 1930, Albert Sr. died a few months short of his 70th birthday. The city fondly remembers him. Albert Jr. now takes over the business. His wife, Etta, is a music teacher, and she shows up in the paper many times for different events where she's praised for her musical talents. Here's a 1930 ad for a drink called Hewsing's Lemon. It's interesting. And this is a 1930 ad for ice delivery. And by the way, most of their ice had been delivered by horse and wagon. He says, just call us and we'll deliver at any time that you want. And just look at her on her telephone there. Beginning in 1933 is when I start to see that there are company teams. This one's horseshoes, but I also see baseball teams, and here's a girls' softball team. They would have games with other local companies. That's pretty cool. In 1934 or 35, they obtained the first Pepsi franchise for the area. Now, this 1935 city directory mentions that the ice company is now called Rock Island Artificial Ice and Coal Company. I don't know exactly when the coal part was added. So Albert's running 2 companies out of the same property right now. In 1939, they opened a second bottling plant in Davenport, but I'm not sure if that one's still standing. In 1940, there were a series of robberies around Rock Island. One of the robberies was $1,100 from Hewsing's. Well, it turns out that one suspect was a driver for Hewsing for the past 10 years. He had some accomplices, and I didn't really look into it too deep to see if he was involved with the other robberies. By 1949, the ice business became less in demand, and it consolidated into the bottling business. In 1951, Albert Jr.'s wife, Etta, died at the age of 70. The 1957 has a few things going on here. The name of the business is changed to A.D. Hewsing Corporation. Albert is still president, and now he's got a new wife, Elizabeth, and she's vice president and treasurer. It says that they are still distributors of Budweiser, Busch Beers, and Pepsi. In the 1960s and 70s, the newspaper articles were mostly about sports teams. In 1965, Albert Jr. has a feature in the paper. He's 77 now, and he's still running the business. We learn that he goes by Bert. It says that at 77, he still works 6 days a week. However, he does take 6 weeks vacation every year. He says in this article that when he first started working for his dad, he was a bottle washer. He said that back then, they had all kinds of flavors of soda and that they made their own flavoring extracts. He says that the current factory is 55,000 square feet and employs about 130 people. This article is in July of 1965, and by December, he has died. He went to the bank and he collapsed on the floor there, and he was pronounced dead a short time later. Now here's a 1966 Babe Ruth Hewsing team, and it looks like a Little League baseball team of some teenagers. We learn in 1977 that Elizabeth, Albert's wife, has taken over the company as president. I was wondering who would, because they didn't have any surviving children. Now remember, she was vice president for a while, and they were actually married about 10 years before he died. Here we see her in this 1982 paper regarding a softball marathon benefiting a foundation for disabled children. In 1986, Elizabeth decided to sell the Anheuser-Busch line and would continue selling the sodas. Elizabeth said that Anheuser-Busch needed so much more room that they would have to expand yet again, and she had already expanded 3 times, and they didn't want to do it again. Now, even though Albert didn't have any surviving children, Albert's sister, Charlotte, married a guy named Fred Helpenstell, who was a dentist, and they did have some children. One of them was named Franz Helpenstell, who went by Bud. So he's Albert's nephew. Now Bud actually worked at the plant on and off since he was in high school. He went to the military for a while, but then he came back to the plant. He started working on the production line and he worked his way up. He's vice president here. Here's a 1987 ad for their annual softball marathon benefiting disabled children. Hewsing also gets a few articles for their contributions to the community. In 1992, Miss Elizabeth dies at the age of 83. It says that she was acquainted with Joan Crawford and Ed McMahon. It says that in her later years that she spent some time in her Florida condo. She says that Albert Jr. actually approached her to work for him while she was working at the bank. It was after she worked there a little while that they fell in love and got married. Their families had been longtime friends. She says she remembers seeing the ice delivery wagon in front of her house as a kid. Here's a 1993 ad for one of their brands of spring water. Now in 1995, Bud Helpenstell is now running the business. He's showing his daughter Amy the ropes as they celebrate the 60th anniversary of being an independent Pepsi franchise. Now here's a 1999 article celebrating the company's 100th anniversary. Here's Bud and Amy again, and Amy has been the company president for a year now. In this article, she says that Bert Hewsing moved the plant to the current location, which is on 37th Avenue. She started working at the factory pretty early on and learned the ropes and is now running things. Her dad is still board chairman. About 5 years into her presidency, Amy died at the age of 32. Unfortunately, she had been battling with anorexia for a long time, and she died of a heart failure. Friends of Amy's said very nice things about her. And as far as I can tell, her father resumed leadership of the company again. This 2006 article restates some of the history of the company and lets everyone know that there's no plans to sell and it's still going strong. 2009, there are still Hewsing teams out there. I'm not sure which sport this is though. In 2018, the Pepsi-Cola plant changed ownership to WP Beverages. The plant kept the employees and is still in operation. This is Google Maps. It still has Hewsing's name on the front there. As far as I can tell, Mr. Helpenstell is still alive. He'd be in his 80s. So I'm not sure exactly what year my bottle is, but it is machine made. So I'm going to estimate the 19 teens, maybe early 20s. And that's it for today. It's kind of cool that the company stayed in the family for 119 years, until just recently. Anyways, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.